Well, welcome everybody to this session. It's going to be a conversation with myself, Matt Tom, and Jevan. And we also have a Q&A session at the very end. So I wanted to kind of get the juices flowing and ask you guys a couple of questions or think about what you might want to know. Obviously, this is going to be a conversation built around entrepreneurship and, starting a business and things like that. So if you have questions along those veins, think about what you might be interested in. Some of the big ones are why would you want to do this, right? How do you do this, that sort of thing. What's a motivator, things like that. So definitely kind of think of those interesting sorts of questions, and we'll be happy to tackle those. With that, let's kind of jump in. We will start with kind of a brief intro for both of us, and then we'll kind of start out with our conversation. So with that, I'd love to turn it over to Jevan and have him tell us a little bit about himself.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that, Matt. And I guess thank you to the Protein Directory for having me here to talk about, our journey and the company. And so with that in mind, I guess I'm Jevan. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Better Dairy. A bit about, Better Dairy. We are a company that are engineering microorganisms to produce products that are molecularly identical to traditional dairy, but without needing to use any animals as part of the process. And so you've got a lot of different players in the space. There's obviously a huge sustainability problem to go after and solve. And you've got plant-based players and also more cellular agriculture players and more fermentation players. And we sit in the fermentation space. So very much looking at how you can leverage fermentation to really solve this underlying problem.
Very cool. Very cool. And what is your sort of educational background? Like, are you a tech person? Are you a business person?
Yeah, I guess it's an interesting one because I see myself kind of as a bit of both. I'm going through school. I really like sciences. I did really well in chemistry and these kind of sciences. I went off to university and did mathematics at university. So not quite a science, but it's kind of a little bit in that realm. But then after that, I then went down a completely different path, and went into more of the corporate world, into banking, things like this. And so my schooling is really, a bit of technical, but then my formal training and professional life has been non-technical in some regard.
Interesting. All right. And myself, my name is Matt Tom. I am a consultant to this very exciting alternative protein space. I am a bioprocess engineer. As you can tell, I like to get my hands dirty and build things and try out things. And what I found in my time in this industry since about 2011, 2012 is that it's always exciting. People are trying to figure out how things work. There's other people trying to put together things. There's other people trying to message things. There's people trying to make policy. So this is a giant sphere, and we are basically in the food global movement, right? We're changing things, and so it's very exciting to have Jevan and his company here tell us about those things. I kind of wanted to jump in there because he mentioned that he had a somewhat different background, right? And for myself too, I kind of fell into the food space because I actually started in biomedical things. And this is one of those things where I think we're going to benefit from all perspectives, people with all backgrounds, right? And that's how you make change on a global scale, right? And so it's very cool to hear the different types of paths that you have taken to get to this spot. So, over the course of this conversation, we're going to touch on a couple of different points. So if you see me looking down, I've printed out really big notes for myself so I can read them. But I think, on that, I wanted to kind of start with that and ask Jevan, like, what in your background or in your life experience, do you think has uniquely prepared you for this journey that you're on right now?
Yeah, so I guess it's a good question. And when you speak to that old wise sage and they say, everything that I did, was for a reason and it all culminated in this moment. To be honest with you, I really feel like this is that moment for me. And so, all those experiences, the chemistry I was doing at high school, the math I was doing at university, my different corporate jobs, which sometimes didn't really seem like they would lead me to this point. It all gave me experience, which is all blended together to actually get me into this position and makes me feel empowered and able to actually capitalize on the opportunity that's there, which is, disrupting dairy, building out this company and really going after this. And so, there's a lot of things that are through my career and through my working life and school life that really prepared me. I would say alongside that, I also proactively took steps to really game myself, as it were, to learn the skills, to like take a step in a direction that was a little less familiar for myself. And, it was something that I felt I needed to do. Even public speaking is something that didn't come naturally to a math geek, from university. And so these are all things that I've consciously also worked on, in addition to those experiences.
Is there something specific you can point to that you think was really life-changing that helped you?
Yeah, so I think, diving into my background a bit. So after I studied mathematics at Imperial College here in London, I actually went into investment banking. And even before university, I actually spent, my first job at 18 was in private equity. And so, it felt almost premeditated that I was going to go into banking of some sort. And so that's where I started off my career. And I spent about 3.5 years there, jumping up the rungs and getting better and better and leveling up in that system. And so for me, I wasn't entirely happy with what I was doing, and I wasn't really sure what else was out there. I think often sometimes after university, we end up on these tracks and we end up, going down and just starting with our career and then just leveling up. And before you know it, you're like, how did I get into this? Or why am I even doing this? This is not really making me happy. And so at that juncture, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I would say the first thing was to really accept that I didn't like what I was currently doing, and taking the risk and being proactive in terms of quitting my job and figuring out, okay, I don't know what I want to do, but I know it's not this. And so I need to quit my job to give myself the breathing room to then figure out what's next. And so I spent that time, I traveled around Asia for a little bit, the find yourself kind of quarter life crisis kind of vibe. And, I realized, tech was a relevant thing of our generation. I came back to London. And so that was the first time, the first juncture where I'd say really set me down this path, shaking away from just the way my life was progressing and being more proactive in terms of shaping out how I wanted my career or how I wanted my work to be, and taking that into my own hands. And so I came back to London and I got into tech, and I started off by working at Rocket Internet. And it was there that, I made a transition from banking to tech. And so that was one big tick.
I see. Okay. Yeah, that takes a lot of courage, right? It's pretty scary to stop doing the only thing that you really know, right? And say, hey, I'm ready to look for something else. So I think like those are definitely good characteristics to have, right? Not only is it I guess it's kind of like self-awareness to know, and they say that in the startup world a lot, right? You have to fail and fail fast, because that tells you, it's just as good to know what not to do as well as what to do, right? So I think that sounds really cool. You're very brave, very courageous to do that. And so now we've gotten you out of that sort of banking thing into tech. Of course, that's kind of a long way away from where we are here. So is there anything that you felt was, momentous where you kind of landed on this? How did you land on this space?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a gradual journey towards it, to be honest, Matt. So, this was my change from banking into tech. And so I made that transition and I was like, cool, I'm in tech now. I'm starting to understand the acronyms. What does business development mean, right? Like as a job, right? It's such a great name. Or what are these, what's online marketing, offline marketing? I at least started understanding a bit more about the physical world and business and startups. And so that really was a gradual process where I was just able to learn a lot and start formulating ideas in my mind of what the industry kind of was like. After spending some time at Rocket, I realized I wanted to build my own company. And that was another juncture, another learning where even more than changing from one career to another, I then wanted to game myself to actually, build a company and actually take even more risk to go build my own thing. And that was the next tick and the next gamification I had to, overcome.
So what and that's a big jump as well, because I know there's a lot of people there, we're comfortable going to work. We know, you know what to expect, right? It's 9 to 5, but to say this isn't good for me, I want to do something really crazy and take a lot of risk. Like, what is that thing that motivated you to do that? Is there some specific mindset? Were you rushing towards something or away from something? How did you kind of get to that point where you're like, I want to do something myself, be my own boss, that sort of thing?
Yeah, well, I think it actually, it came from actually when I was young. Even when I was 10, I used to trade Pokemon cards and make money buying and selling, like a little bit of a hustler in primary school. And, I always wanted to build my own business. If I think back to like 14-year-old me, other kids were like, I don't know, playing around. I was looking at the stock market. I was thinking about like, business. I just got excited by business at an early age. it just took me a really long time to feel like empowered and feel like I could actually build a business. And I felt like I had the skills and I identified the right opportunity to do so. And so back at my time at Rocket, when I was there, I then started thinking, all right, what's holding me back? I'm aware of how to build a company in some regard. And I now, I've identified some areas that are interesting, e-commerce, fintech, food tech, and food tech back then, at least for me, was very much like Deliveroo or Uber Eats or these kind of things. And so I decided to leave my job at Rocket. I went and just fumbled around in the space for a bit, and I landed upon food tech as an area. And it was very much the digital side, as I mentioned. And that's what really got me down this path of thinking about food, thinking about restaurants, thinking about food manufacturing. And, as I said, with banking to tech and then tech to my own company, that this part of my journey was, understanding what food tech was. And so that was a huge thing for me.
Yeah. So tell us a little bit about that. It sounds like your company now is, technology based, product based. What are some of the challenges you've encountered? How do you do things day to day? What's exciting to you day to day? What are you looking forward to most?
Yeah, so for me, this company that we're building now is just hugely exciting. It's way bigger than any of the other companies I've tried to build before. In terms of the impact, in terms of the economic output, in terms of just all of it, the consumer readiness, the deeply technical nature of it. It's just all like come to this moment. As I said at the beginning. And so with that, I think while it's great what we're building and there's a lot there to go after, there's also a lot of challenges. There's also a lot to kind of overcome to actually get us to where we want to get to. In the actual forming of this company, as we talked about, I am a bit technical, but I'm not a scientist by training. And so there's a big hurdle, to go and learn, and really absorb some of these deeply scientific concepts. I think, if you want to go into it and you don't have the scientific background, I think that it's not the end of the world and you can do it and you can will your way through it. But you have to spend the time and you have to have the dedication to really understand some deeply scientific principles. Not to have to replicate in our lab, but to be able to coordinate and string together and understand what challenges exist so that you can then overcome them. And so,
right. I was going to say, I bet a lot of that means you have to surround yourself with the right people and build the right teams. Can you tell us a little bit about that? How are you moving forward in that in building your company?
Yeah, so definitely. I mean, you probably know, better than me, being an early stage person at so many different, successful companies, the early stage people and the people you surround yourself with are hugely impactful on the outcome of the company and the success rate, really. That's advisors, that's first time hires, that's, mentors, that's the investors that you bring in. It's all, I guess, conscious, and it should be done in a conscious way, because it's so impactful, each of those things. And so, because what we're doing is so scientific and so deeply scientific, I think having a solid scientific advisory board is very helpful. For us, both my co-founder and I are both alumni of Imperial College. And so we really managed to leverage off of that to tap into the faculties that are there, the PhD students, even some of the undergrads. It's really helped us. And especially because we're using so many different sciences in what we're doing, it really helped us as well there, having that access. And so, scientific advisors is one thing. I think aside from that, also strategic advisors and people who've either gone down this path already or mentors who are a couple stages ahead, they're also very useful and been very supportive in terms of, no one knows it all. And I'm just getting to the next stage to then get to the next stage to eventually one day, hopefully wake up and say, you know what, we've disrupted dairy. And, having someone who's a bit further along that you can speak to, it's not always easy. Sometimes you go to sleep and you're like, oh God, I made this decision today. Am I going to regret this, 3 years down the line? Someone you can talk to who's done it already is very helpful.
It's kind of, now focusing on your company, like what stage are you at? When did you form it? What does kind of a day-to-day look like for you right now as you're trying to accomplish your mission?
Yeah, so I formed the company at the end of last year, and technically we incorporated this year in January. So I can claim to have achieved everything in 2020, although to be honest, it's been a little bit before that. And so with the company, we got some initial investment from Entrepreneur First. They're our pre-seed investors. They're a program backed by Reid Hoffman, Peter Thiel, a couple of these great entrepreneurs. And it really gave us the capital and I guess some of the guidance to really go and build out this idea. And so since then, we've been, working a lot on the science. Ultimately, there's a lot of science that goes into this. There's obviously also the strategy. What are we actually doing? What are the products? Like, what are the markets? Who are the partners? What does the space look like? But alongside that, there's just a lot of science to be done. And so a lot of my job right now, while we've raised a further round of investment, and, I can't talk too much about it yet because we're doing a press release around it. But, on that note, we've raised that. So we're really focused more on the science side of things. And so my day-to-day is really empowering the science team and my co-founder, the scientists in the lab, to actually get the most out of what they're doing day-to-day and making sure that we're equipping them for success. And that's probably 75% of my day. The other 25 is the accounting that's needed. You're looking at regulation. You're thinking about hiring. You're monitoring social media. You're thinking about the website. Okay, the website, might not be great. How do I upgrade that? And so the fortunate thing is, building a company is very multifaceted, and that's what I love about it. It's very exciting. But right now, majority of my role is science enablement. I'm like the lab manager, the enabler.
That's really good to hear how you're directing it. I'd like to focus a little bit on some specific details on your company, and then we can, or your products, I guess, and then we can throw it out to the Q&A session. I see some questions popping up here in the chat, so that's really good. Keep them coming. But yeah, if you could talk a little bit about, what, I know you gave the one sentence in the beginning, but what are the things you're going to be focusing on?
Yeah, so we're very focused on dairy, and more specifically, milk is made up of proteins, fats, and sugars. And with different combinations of these proteins, fats, and sugars, you can go after various different dairy products. Each of these individual constituents as well in their own right are billion-dollar industries. And so they themselves can be quite interesting for nutritional properties, functional properties. There's a whole bunch of benefits to each of these individual pieces. And so for us, we're initially focused on these smaller units, while eventually we want to create these fully fledged, consumer dairy products. There's actually a lot of value in just the individual pieces. And so the way that I see us focusing and adding the most value and impact right now is potentially, focusing on delivering those ingredients to market. And so that's really kind of where we're shaping out the next year to 2 years on just focusing solely on that piece of the puzzle. Because I think, it's so grand and there's so much to do and there's so much opportunity that it's almost, you can almost fall a victim to spreading yourself too thinly, trying to think too much about brand and then science and the technology and then all these other things. Sometimes it's better to focus, and that's the way I'm thinking about it anyway.
That does sound really good. That sounds really good. So, I'd like to open it up to Q&A right now. And looking in the chat here, I see a question from Julia. Let's see if I can summarize this very quickly. Blah, 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 expectations. Oh, so this is kind of interesting. I think you can probably see the chats as well. But yeah, this kind of brings up a really good point, which is, this is a global thing, but your company, of course, is based in Europe, in London, right? And so what are some of the unique challenges that you are facing there in terms of how you expect your business model to work, the products themselves, might there be some limits there, as this question alludes to? Talk a little bit about how things are unique or different from this perspective.
Yeah, so I think there's a whole bunch to it. And so, yeah, thank you, Julia, for the question and leading us down this path, because I think, there's a lot of exciting things that being based in the UK leads itself to, a lot of challenges as well there. So, with Brexit and things like this happening on a more geopolitical level, there's a lot of opportunities around potential grant funding. The UK looking at, like, if we break away from the EU, how do we actually invest and have innovation and stimulate jobs? And so there's actually potential for grant funding and tapping into these kind of grant funding opportunities. And so that's hugely exciting. I'd say in addition to that, while we are in the UK, we do see ourselves as a global company. And so there are things and there are considerations around UK and Europe in terms of regulatory environment. It seems like there's a lot of movement now and there's a lot of focus on it. And the environment is getting better and better and more conducive to products like ours. And so on that, by the time we become product ready, which, should be hopefully in the near future, these regulations are already starting to catch up and the regulators are engaging very heavily with industry on this. But as a side point, I think we see ourselves as a global company. And so we're not geographically bound. I talked about, I was speaking at a climate tech conference before, and climate issues are global. these products are kind of global, and people everywhere want to eat good food. People everywhere care about the environment, or are starting to care about the environment. And so we also, by virtue of being a startup and not being a large corporate, we can also plop down different divisions in different places. I'm sure you guys probably saw today, just announced that in Singapore, they are, producing these products, and they got approval to actually sell their chicken in the market. Just is not a Singaporean company. And so I think if you think about it in that lens, we're no longer also geographically bound. We can, go into different places where the government or the consumer or the corporates are more, conducive to our overall mission.
Excellent. And that's a good point. And it kind of leads into this next question from Christian, which is, where's kind of your first market, or how do you think about rolling this out? And I think you kind of hinted that you're going to focus on the ingredients or the building blocks portion of it first. And that might set you up to be, a sort of a B2B. But can you talk a little bit about what is kind of the things you think about in order to make those decisions, right? Like, hey, maybe I want to try this first, or maybe I want to go there first. Like, can you walk us through that sort of thought process? What are the external factors that are kind of influencing your decision?
Yeah, so it's a very good question. It really is multidimensional. You're looking at the regulatory environment. Ultimately what we're selling, you need people to consume. And no regulation's also not good, by the way. Ultimately, we don't want to poison people. There's a reason why there's toxicology tests for things. And so, there's a responsibility that we also bear, especially by being in the food industry. And that's something I take, very seriously. And so regulation and the right regulators who are regulating in the right way is a thing. Also, aside from that, there's obviously the market opportunity. So going after a small country versus a large country, if you launch in a large demographic like the US, you obviously have more people, and so you get a smaller market share that can lead to larger revenues. So, the market size is also a consideration. The team and the ease of entering the market is probably a third thing I'd say. And so while we're in the UK, although we see ourselves as global, obviously there are time zone things. Also, we're a startup, and so our senior management team can't be spread too thinly, because all of a sudden, you got CEO one place, CTO another place, your head of R&D another place, and we got to be conscious of that as well. And so where we can, we will try and keep it local in some regard until one of the others, either market opportunity or regulation, seems like a blocker. And so with that in mind, we're very much looking at the European market as a starting point. Dairy resonates very culturally across different cultures, especially in Europe. France, people are evangelical about cheese. UK, we have cheddar. In the Netherlands, they have the Edam. They have loads of different types. And so it seems like a great starting point for a dairy company.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So we've got a couple of minutes here, and I see a couple more questions rolling in. You probably do too. So whichever seems more interesting for you to tackle right now in the 3 minutes we have, why don't you go for it? We've got one from David, who is trying to figure out, how do you kind of figure out who the best customer is to reach out to first, and what you might need to do to convince them that you have this new stellar product. And then Christian is asking something about, how do you just keep on track, right? There's obviously so many things to think about, what's the best way to keep focused?
Yeah, so I think I can answer both. So with David's, I think it's really iteration, right? You've got to just go out and start talking to people, whether it's like, maybe it's the restaurant, maybe it's the food manufacturer, maybe, it's a consumer. You just got to go and get loads of intel on the market. And that's a process that you just have to get comfortable with going and doing. And so, you got to cold call some people, or go to conferences, or attend places like this and network with people and just have those conversations and iterate, right? Like, you're not going to have the right conversation with the right person the first time. You've got to just think about the messaging and think about the ask. And over time, you eventually get the insights you want through iterating. It's not like there's no silver bullet, unfortunately. But also, fortunately, there's no silver bullet. So you just got to go and iterate, and you can get there. And then for Christian's question, which is really about how you are not getting lost in the jungle, it's a very hard thing. It's very easy. You have to have a very high level picture, but then also dive into the details. And it's very easy to get lost in the jungle. I think I'm conscious to take a step back and think about like what we're trying to ultimately achieve. And that helps me not get lost. And my R&D and my business development, everything that I put together is very consciously put together with the view of what is it there to achieve, right? So you could indefinitely do R&D, or you can indefinitely do business development, or you can indefinitely do operations, or any of these things. In a startup and a company, we're not like a corporate who has unlimited amounts of funds and time. you're doing everything consciously. So you do enough R&D to get to the next level of unlocking business development. You do that to get to the next level of operations, which then allows you to then get to the next level on funding, which then allows you more resources to then double down or triple down or 10 times down on these things.
Yeah, and I'd like to jump in there because I think one of the things that people kind of forget is it's such a big space, and you're starting out at the beginning, like you want to do everything, right? And especially is true for product focused companies, right? They always say you want to be aligned with the market pull, and that kind of keeps you on track because the market is going to tell you what are the features they're looking for, right? And we can use our other industries to kind of see that, right? With cars, going from gasoline to hybrid to electric, right? Smartphones, with this camera feature or that camera feature, right? There are certain product features that the people at large are going to be looking for, and of course you want to develop those, and then depending on which aspect of it you want to focus on, right, then that really determines who that customer is and what the final product is going to look like. So I think those are really good things to keep in mind as you build a product focused company. All right, I see one last question here, but unfortunately we are right about at the edge of time. So I would love to thank Jevan for his time here and talking to us. And of course, if you have any last words for us, definitely leave us some of your wisdom.
Thank you very much, Matt. It was lovely talking to you. And thank you, everybody else who's dialed in and listened to me ramble on for a bit about my journey to date.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. All right. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.